So tonight we are delighted to have the world's leading expert on the Knish, Laura Silver, with us tonight. Laura has a new book out, The Knish. It's for sale up at the front in case you're inspired. And her book explores the origins of this sort of quintessentially Lower East Side food. Laura is an award-winning journalist whose writing on food and culture has appeared in the New York Times, The Forward, The Jerusalem Report, and on NPR. She teaches a class called Jewish Food Through Song and Film at the New School and is a research associate at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute. Laura is also a Tenement Museum staff alumnus, and we are delighted to have her back tonight. Laura will be in conversation with Chana Pollack, the photo archivist at the Jewish Daily Forward newspaper. Chana is in the process of creating a digital photo archive of the paper's 117-year-old history. Articles and images from the archive can be seen on the Forward Looking Back column in print and online, as well as on the paper's Instagram page. Chana's archival work can also be viewed in the book A Living Lens, and she serves as camera person, editor, and co-producer on a video series called Yiddish Writers' Monologues. So welcome to you both, and I think we're going to start with Laura. Would you like to come up and tell us more about the book?
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. I think I took this book on tour to the West Coast, and I think this is the warmest welcome I've received yet. So thank you. Thank you, Tenement Museum. And some of you may know, if you come here when there's not an event, you'll know there are books here, right? There's a lot of books, and the whole staff moves all the books back there. So I just want to say such a big thank you to all my colleagues with whom I arranged and sold and stocked books. Ralph, thank you so much. Sarah, Kit, thank you. You guys and Sarah, Litvin, and Laura Lee, and Mike. There's so many times I was here looking at everyone else's book and saying, someday, someday, I'm going to have a book. So thank you. This is really a momentous occasion. And now you've seen the entrails of my talk. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what my research entailed, and then we'll get to one of the most important components of my research and one of the most important people in my research. I met Chana many years ago at an opening in Chelsea. It was random. And then when I started work on this, I called her and said, hey, would you meet me for lunch? I don't know why. And then one day she called me with some fateful news, and you will hear that fateful news as soon as you stop seeing the inner workings of my screen. So, which is just, people want a little insight into a writer's process. So there you have it. And also we're not even at the beginning here. So now you're going to have a lot more. Sorry, folks, we're just going to go back. Here, we'll go out of my process, then we'll enter it again. Okay, here we're going to re-enter my process. So, I think you know what the book is about. I'm honored to be discussed in, these people need to know to go around. I'm honored to be discussed, heralded along with the pretzel, hot dog, etc. And I guess that makes me sound like I am the Knish, and sometimes I felt like the Knish incarnate, actually. I did put on some pounds. I'm still working on that. So here, just for clarification, this is how you spell Knish. It's one syllable. This is what it looks like. This is the round kind. There's also the square kind. Let's have a little show of hands. Round. Who's in favor of round? Whoa. Square? Wow. Who likes Knishes with mustard? That's something we can pretty much agree on. Okay. So right, the Knish does elicit heated opinions. We're just after the Knish crisis of 2013 to 2014, and we escaped that. Knishes are in production. Again, I'm proud to say that when these square Knishes were imperiled, Al Jazeera called me and interviewed me right around the corner where the Knish was born, where Gabillas, the square Knishes, came to life. I think we're entering a golden age where the round and square Knishes can indeed sit together And you'll see I'm not the only one who equates knishes with world peace. We'll get there one knish at a time. Oh, good, we're contributing to the narrative. I appreciate it. So my story is, of course, firmly rooted in the Lower East Side, where one of my grandmothers landed when she came here, but it also starts primarily in Brooklyn, in Mrs. Stahl's. Anyone know that place? Brighton Beach? Okay, wow. Okay, this was my family's Knish shop. This is where we went. My dad went and his parents before him. You see the great 80s fashion here, it's sort of coming back. For 70 years, this shop was beneath the subway, the elevated subway. When I went back in 2005, it was a subway. Yeah. What happened to Mrs. Stahl's Knish? It was adopted by a member of another immigrant group which shares a lot of history with Jews of Eastern Europe, an Italian guy, Mike Conti, who ran Conti's Pasta. Anyone ever been to Conti's Pasta? It's a factory in Vineland, New Jersey, which oddly enough was a town known for Jewish chicken farmers. So full circle or square, whatever you prefer. Mike Conti was very receptive to my initial calls. He said he had made his kitchen kosher, and in fact, he was producing knishes in many flavors, potato, kasha, or buckwheat, all the way to the sweet flavors, sweet cheese with fruit and so forth. Now, as I continued my research, I realized that Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Boardwalk, had been a veritable mecca for Knish shops. It paralleled the Lower East Side and its Knish density, if I may say so. Here is one of the other heroes of the Knish I encountered in my travels, Mano Hirsch. Certainly, he was what he ate as well. You can see the sign here, the Hebrew lettering says kosher. You know this was a while ago if a Knish was 40 cents. Another hero, Brooklyn hero of the Knish, was Ruby the Knish Man. Anyone know him? Ruby Oshinsky. Songs written about him, web pages devoted to him. Here he is with a pushcart. He hung around outside Canarsie High School, Winthrop Junior High in Brooklyn. And the storied history of the Knish as a pushcart-related food, of course, links to the Lower East Side. Here's a more modern rendition. And the Knish did have a tough moment in the 90s when Mayor Giuliani was in office, and one of his ideas was to regulate the temperature of potatoes on street carts. But the Knish rebounded from that too. Now it's often found with one of its Knishing cousins, the Jamaican beef patty. There they are. But of course, this all harkens back to a history that's firmly rooted to this museum. Here, the pushcart, the roving peddler. Gabilla's, the square Knish I showed you, started off as a peddler-based operation. And so did Elinor Schimmel, actually, which is not too far from here. At one point, a block near here was the most populous place on the planet. I mean, today we think of places like Calcutta or towns in India as being so crammed in. That was here. And what were those people eating? Right. So here's a photo of Elinor Schimmel's by Rebecca Lepkoff, who's a dear friend of the Tenement Museum and whose work was on display here. So thank you to the Tenement Museum for brokering, she brought me this image right here. I'm here to tell you the story that Hannah helped me discover. It's a story of another Knish maker who operated just a few blocks east of here on Houston Street. So I gave you the intro. Hannah and I knew each other more or less. And one day I get an email, Laura, I found some reference to a Knish on the front page of the Forward in the early 40s. I didn't have the picture then, but here's what it looks like, just to give you a teaser. It's hard to see, but that's all being digitized and fixed up, remember? Anyway, I said, really? Weird, because I heard of a woman who sells Knish. I heard that woman, Gussie Schwabel, it rang a bell. I'd read about her in the Washington Post. In fact, not only was she an excellent Knish maker, she was an excellent publicist. Here is, she was written up in the New York Sun, and no sooner did this story, Wars or No Wars, the Knish Queen Carries On, no sooner was that out than it was in the mail to who do you think she sent it to? Who? To me? No, this is in the 40s. Any other guesses who she sent it to? Huh? FDR. Very close. Mrs. FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt. Here's a letter to the First Lady. Dear Mrs. Roosevelt, would you like, I don't know if you can read it. Maybe you can. The purpose of this letter is twofold. First, it is my sincere hope that I may be permitted to send you a sample of my dish. The Knish Witch, believe me, my dear Mrs. Roosevelt, is really worth tasting. And as you see, she also thought it would be a great way to keep the armed forces in shape and keep them fighting for her adopted country. Amen. So, this is what happens. The Mrs. Roosevelt's secretary gets it, or the undersecretary gets it and writes this memo pleading with the secretary, maybe you don't want to do it, but why don't you give it a try? Otherwise, they'll just go to waste. Don't waste these Knishes, these Americans. Speaking of the 4th of July, this patriotic food to be needs you. So these are from the Roosevelt archives, and I was tipped off after I saw the article on the front page of the forward. So then there's a response, please come, you're okay, we'll accept a delivery, and then we have this urgent question. Thank you so much, telegram. Thank you so much for informing me about Mrs. Roosevelt's willingness to taste my Knishes. They are best oven hot. I could not agree more, by the way. And for that reason, I beg you to let me know the exact hour, Friday or Saturday, when I should deliver them to her home, a place in Upper East Side, Lower Upper East Side. Gratefully, wire answer by Western Union Collect. Okay, the First Lady is going to charge back the telegram cost to Mrs. Schwabel at 181 East Houston. Well, not exactly. She mailed the letter. Okay, deliver them. They set a time. Mrs. Schwabel starts baking. The New York Sun. First Lady's get a taste of Knish. Oh, read about Mrs. Schwabel in the New York Sun. Kind of. Read about Mrs. Schwabel in the New York Sun when Mrs. Schwabel sent her a clipping of herself. Who can blame her? Anyway, all the wheels are in motion. The pans have been greased. And the next day, here we come back to what Hannah tipped me off to. Here is Mrs. Schwabel on the front page of the forward. And it's hard, I had to crop it so you can't really see the caption that said, Mrs. Roosevelt wants to try Jewish Knishes, but ... Well, sometimes when there's so much hype about something, people really gather around and there's a lot of people in a certain place. And Mrs. Roosevelt's secretary was not pleased. Too many paparazzi, too many onlookers, too many people so excited to see the Knish rise to the echelons of government, and they were turned away. So, but Mrs. Schwabel still got the front page slot, and she didn't stop. Here, I love this, she puts in things, out come Knishes. I think there should be a musical of her life. She's an opera, are you kidding? An opera, you're right, it is. Lyricist, librettists, see me after. And here was a headline that really stuck with me, Knish to solve peace problems. You should know Mrs. Schwabel said Knishes could also cross the aisle in government, the Republican and Democratic dishes. I think we should call her into play. Another episode of my research was in the forward, had to do with a picture Hannah and I corresponded about extensively, and our code word for it, well, you'll see why in a minute, our code word is cholent. What's cholent? Sabbath stew, right, something you cook overnight. And this picture I'd seen in other places, and I really identified with it. And then I found out it was from the same town as my family was from, in Poland, Białystok. And here are the ladies. Here it is in the forward. The caption was in English and Yiddish, and it's talking about interesting sight. Women carrying cholent pots to the bakery on a Friday evening. And this, to me, looked like my extended family saying goodbye to me after I left a family gathering in Boston. I mean, the ages aren't exactly right. The dress needs to be updated, but this is a general feel. So I was, soon after Mrs. Stahl's went out of business, a few years after, I was lucky enough to go with some members of my extended family to Białystok, Poland, on a roots trip. And I kept thinking we were going to see these people. You know, it's something, cognitive dissonance. What we saw was not that. This is, this is the Jewish cemetery in Białystok. I didn't even realize there had been a pogrom there, this uprising, and here was the monument that had been, this happened in 1906, and this monument had been destroyed. We saw a more modern version of it. Here's the outskirts of that. And I should say that, you know, we gathered in Białystok, and we hadn't seen each other for 30 years because some of them live in New Jersey. So, so this was a monumental trip for us, and we found each other. I haven't seen some of them since. Nothing personal. We just, you know, still New Jersey, New York. But for us, the trip was really, as you probably guessed, filled with a lot of emptiness, and it felt like we had kind of missed out. It was hard to find any tangible link to our past. It really resonated, and our last day there, our tour guide, who was also Mimi Sheridan's tour guide, if you know her, she wrote about the Bialy, and has appeared here many times. Our tour guide said, he translated a document my cousin had carried from San Diego to New York to Prague to Warsaw to Białystok, only to discover that this cousin's mother had ties to a nearby town which was called Knish. Fast forward a year or two, fast forward next year, I went to Knish. 7
o'clock.
Oh yeah, it is. Sorry, that's my computer. That's also, that's a look under the hood. Sometimes when I was writing this, I would lose track of time, so I would just have my computer remind me that the hours were passing, and I haven't. It is 7 o'clock. At least it's correct. So in Knish, it's not 7 o'clock, but so there's one important discovery. I had relatives there. I went back there, and then I went to the archives in Białystok, where all the papers are kept, and after jotting down a lot of crypt notes in Russian and Polish, I was able to find the birth certificate of my mother's mom, my grandmother, and in fact, she was born in Knish. So that makes me a direct descendant of the Knish. Here's part of my quest. This is in a nearby town called Tokocin, where there is a synagogue. That's a museum, but occasionally used as a synagogue still. When I went back to Poland, I was lucky enough to encounter a version of Isaac Bashevis Singer. Here he is at a Jewish cultural festival, which bears his name. Also of note, Isaac Bashevis Singer did include Nobel Prize laureate, mentioned the Knish here and there. He said that blintzes, when they turn cold, become Knishes. But I was hot on the trail. This is the Knish train station. It's a town of about 2,000. The count now, they say 2,000 to 4,000 people. Used to be closer to 4,000, with half the population being Jewish. Here's downtown Knish, pretty rockin' at midday. Knish also, I was so excited to find out we had a link there, because it's one of the few towns in that area and in the whole country of Poland that has a Jewish cemetery that is extant. Some of the graves date to the 1700s. So that was exciting to find some tangible manifestation of Jewish culture there. And these are not, I couldn't find any remnants of my family per se, but it's still a strong point of identity. And another important thing that happened in Knish was I met the town, now he's the vice mayor, then he was working his way up. And to me, he really looked a lot like Gene Wilder in the first Willy Wonka. It's Gene Wilder's birthday today, by the way. But here's Krzysztof Baczynski looking at the pictures of Knishes I brought with me, headshots to bridge the language barrier. He didn't really recognize these, but he had a book on his desk about legends of the Knish. And there are two. One says the town takes its name from the Knish. That legend is reproduced for the first time ever in English in my book. The other legend said that the Knish was linked to mourning rituals a way to comfort those who were bereaved, and that women hired to cry, weepers at funerals, would often distribute these round stuffed pastries. And not just in the Jewish tradition, also in Christian traditions. And this reminded me of the mourning cry I hear when I tell people about my Knish work, which is, you can't get a good Knish. Where do you get a good Knish? So I thought, wow, the Knish can really bridge cultural gaps. In fact, here's a photo I found of life in Knishin in about the 30s or so. These people are at a celebration. That's a joke. I mean, it's serious, but it's funny. See the schnapps in the front? This is, but we don't have any photos of my family in Knishin, but so I kind of think of these people by extension as some relatives. Maybe you find some people who look familiar to you in this photo. Another forward from the forward, or the foverts in Yiddish, that really moved me and that Chana helped with. And it's so easy to say she helped with. I mean, it takes about, it can take 20 to 30 emails and a lot of back and forth to get the photo. I mean, she's working on making this easier for you future researchers, but it was a lot of devoted work, and I'm grateful. Here are the Knishin town musicians. And they were playing a benefit for Purim. So I think it's pretty great. Now, my story does come full circle, not really square in this case. Through my research, and through one of the people in this room, Audrey Slater and Jill Slater. We want to raise your hand to Audrey. There she is. It turns out I looked high and low. There she is. I looked high and low for relatives of Mrs. Stahl. I found some of my own relatives, and I said, what, I know Mrs. Stahl was a real person, but who was she? Does she have any living relatives? Why can't I find them? Well, I couldn't find them because I was looking under the wrong first name. I juxtaposed some Knish makers. But then after I located one relative, my friend Jill texted me, my mom is in you'll forgive me, in the changing room of the JCC with the other granddaughter of Mrs. Stahl. They're in the locker room right now. I've been searching for, depending on how you count it, 2 to 5 years for Mrs. Stahl. Oh, they're in the locker room right now. You can call her. She doesn't have a cell phone, but you can call my mom right now. Anyway, fast forward, a little after that, I was invited to California with Sarah Spatz, the woman in the locker room, the descendant of Mrs. Stahl, and her cousin, Toby Engelberg, who lives in San Francisco, and we made these Knishes, which they taught me the dough has to be paper thin so you can read the newspaper, preferably the forward through it. And it was Knish boot camp. And it turned out that their grandmother and my grandmother are buried in adjacent cemeteries. And here's a picture. Here's Mrs. Stahl. She came to the U.S. when she had 2 kids and was pregnant with the third. She had a total of, she came with 2, was pregnant with the 5th, actually. Here they are. And she was really a self-made woman and an entrepreneur, not unlike Gussie Schwabel. I don't know if she wrote to Mrs. Roosevelt, but each woman has her own way. Part of my way included going back to Knishin this past summer on a grant from a group called CEC Arts Link. And here I am learning Knish making from the locals. Apparently I need more upper arm strength. I think I fit in pretty well visually, though. What do you think? So this was the town's 3rd annual Knish Contest. There's a festival called Knishin Days. I did a lot of work on Google Translate to understand what was going on there. And it was late in the game I realized there was this Knish making contest. And much to my surprise, I was appointed a judge when I arrived. Here are the contestants, or the Knish contestants. They're they were the winners. I'm modest, but I must say I was the head judge. And we were on regional TV. The Knishes were stuffed with things like horseradish, kasha, mushroom. Those were the top 3 winners. And I'm proud to say of the 6 entries, one of the makers was a man. So there's definitely a breadth of experience that goes into these. And I'm no stranger to yellow Knishes, actually, because I dressed as one once. This was a processional. Jenny Coffey, one of the members of the processional, is with us today, as are my parents, who were the logistical support. So this was called Knish Alley Revival, and 2nd Avenue, near here, as you may know, was once referred to as Knish Alley. That's where Isaac Bashevis Singer went to have his blintzes that turned into Knishes. And it was the home of all Yiddish theaters, and people, actors and directors and audience members all need to eat. They ate at restaurants which serve primarily dairy food, thus Knish Alley. And in the back is Villagey Cinemas, which used to be a Yiddish theater. So if you're interested in participating in a processional in the future, let me know. This is the quadricentennial of the Knish, 400th anniversary. The first mention of a Knish comes from a Polish poem. But now I'll leave you with that. An excerpt from the poem is also available in the book. And if you want to know more, you know where to go. www.knish.me. Now it's really a pleasure to invite up Chana Pollack to get to the bottom of, journey to the center of the Knish. Oh, maybe I should leave that up. Yeah. Oops, okay. I'll just leave it down. Okay, here? Okay. Oh my. Wow. Oh, wow. I know. Ooh.
Hello?
Wow. Here we are. Oh my, I forgot about the bottom part of what I Hi. Okay.
Well, hi. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. 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 I'm like completely verklempt. I find it so moving. And just, you know, go ahead and buy the book and love yourself for crying through a story of Knishes. It's very moving. Yeah, that was my experience. And thank you for being such a great client of an archive. As was mentioned, I've been the photo archivist for the Vorwärts and Forward. And just briefly to explain a little bit about that, we're not exactly open to the public, but we do take special clients, word of mouth, or you know, you can give us a call. I can talk to you afterwards. We have a collection, we estimate, of about 40,000 to 60,000, mostly black and white images that compose what's called in newspaper language the morgue of our paper, which is 117 years old. How many people here read the foreword? Yay. And know about the Vorwärts? Do you remember that? Yeah, all right. Okay, great. So you know that we originated in this neighborhood down the block on East Broadway. And eventually in the 70s, we moved up to 33rd, and now we're over at Maiden Lane. So I've been working on this project of kind of, it's a little bit like triage, I like to say, because we were a newspaper. You know, for newspapers, at least in the old days, the day was done when the newspaper was out, and you know that joke about today's news being fish wrap for tomorrow was kind of how they saw it, so they didn't really worry too much about the morgue, about the photos, and when they were done with them, they just kind of threw them into a file folder with the metal plates from printing the paper. So that's very nice, right, for photographs. So a lot of my job is technical. It's separating them out, identifying them, cleaning them, rehousing them, and I've been gifted with a volunteer to help me index them back into the universe, who actually heard about the archive at a Tenement talk. So I'm grateful to the Tenement Museum for that, and we're always looking for more help. And because I'm associated with a newspaper, it's a little different than an archive of a museum. We get reincorporated into the paper. So, you know, like we were saying, you can see the photos at forward.com or yiddish.forward.com. We have video projects that we participate in as part of the newspaper. And of course, we help independent scholars, filmmakers, you know, authors, books, all kind of, pardon me? Weirdos, Knish weirdos. So that's a little bit about what we do, and I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards about that, how we can help you. And I have to thank the Tenement Museum. I was remembering, too, that a while back we got a call at the Forward Archive that somebody at the Tenement Museum noticed that when our old building was being made into a condo, they were getting rid of the beautiful terracotta on top, and the great Tenement Museum saved pieces of it for us. So including the Yiddish words on top that said forwards, we got some of those back. So that's kind of a major miracle, so thank you. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context about Gussie Schwab, that amazing story, right? About like the only food story I can recall making the front page of the foreword, right, was Gussie Schwabel. So that's kind of amazing because it was 1942. And if you know a little bit about 1942 and what it meant for Jews, it wasn't a good year. Like seriously not a good year. In a series of not good years. That was a really bad one, and some of the research I've done, well, we know 1942 in the spring was going to be the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And apparently in 1942, Hitler had made a public statement that the end of the war was not going to be the end of the Aryan race, but that it was going to be the complete annihilation of the Jews, was his idea. And a little later on in 1942, gassing at Auschwitz really took off, let's say. So, you know, there's the context, and yet 1942 finds Gussie on the front page, which is like amazing, right? So you have to think about what was going on and who was reading the foreword, what was going on in this neighborhood, and how people were trying to comfort themselves, let's say, right? And then there's a connection to Eleanor Roosevelt. Roosevelt, I always say that wrong. I just wanted to point out to folks that, well, as you might know, the forward part of the forward's history is the Bintel brief, right? Like the idea that folks could write letters in was sort of like an Ann Landers, and this went on from, it started in 1906, and it went all the way into the 1980s, that we would answer people's questions. So I like to think that maybe Gussie was inspired to write to Eleanor because she had the experience of the forward and knew that if you write in, you will be heard, you know, maybe. So, you know, that could be that. And I also just, you know, the great thing about that story with Gussie is that Eleanor had a syndicated column called My Day.
Yes.
Where she answered people's letters.
I searched it. I couldn't find any mention of Knish's or Gussie Schwabel. But she apparently also worked as a dance teacher at a settlement house down here. University Settlement, yeah.
Wow.
So that was impressive. So she was no stranger. I think she probably knew what the Knish was. And she also was seen campaigning for her husband at Elinor Schimmel's.
Wow.
According to Izzy Finkelstein, who was a waiter at Elinor Schimmel's back in the day. And I got that tidbit from a book which was written by Jerome Snyder and, I've forgotten his name, the graphic designer who designed I Heart New York. Milton Glaser, exactly. And I wrote to Milton Glaser, who said he didn't remember anything beyond the conversation with Izzy Finkelstein, which was recorded in his book about cheap eats from the late 60s. So it's part of a continuum.
You know, and I have to say, too, this is like a crazy segue, but I have to say there's a surprise in the book, too, because if you'd have told me that, you know, this Knish research thing was gonna end up being spicy, and I mean spicy, yes, in the sexy connotation of that word. My wife and I translate freelance, and we were lucky enough to get some.
Yeah, here are the key translators of my book. Thank you very much.
Right, and to our great surprise, we were presented with some pretty hot lyrics. So, Knish, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Women's anatomy. Use your imagination. I mean, you don't have to go too far. But I'd say it's a great tradition, and that is another, like, I think Knish, the word itself I've learned it serves as an indicator, kind of this litmus test for who you are. I told some guy on Amtrak, I was writing a book about the Knish, and he said, "Are you Jewish?" Well, yes. Some other guy, not too far from here, actually, at a late-night dumpling shop, I told a man of a certain age about my project, and he said, "What kind of Knish are you writing about?" And I said, "No, I don't need a ride home, thank you." So I think Knish in all its forms can be an indicator, but I've met people who said, "Oh yeah, my family always used that word," to refer to private parts. And other people said, "What does that mean? I had no idea." So it's nuanced. And there's a great nightclub performer, Pearl Williams, who I encourage you look up and find. There are references in the book and some of her spicier lyrics. She wasn't shy. But I mean, it's part of women taking pride in themselves. Writing, however you do it. If you want to write to the First Lady, talk about your parts, you know, bake something, it's all part of it.
So, you know, I have to ask you a personal,
from
my, no, it's archivally personal.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if anyone else has this experience, but in my family, Knishes veer from the potato. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but we have the rice Knish. And I was just curious what your experience was. Have you encountered other fillings?
Very limited. I'm glad you brought up the rice Knish because that is a very rare breed. I've heard a lot, people, liver Knishes are also considered rare. My dad did grow up eating liver Knishes, right, from the corner store. But I'd say potatoes are most widespread, but rice is very special. What else was in the rice Knish?
Okay, I should explain a little. It's kind of like a rice pudding. So it's like a sweet rice mixture, a little bit milky, creamy in the...
Inside of a Knish? Is it more like a strudel?
No, we call it a rice Knish, and it's served on, Shavuos, on the Shavuot
holiday.
Well,
I wish I knew. We just passed Shavuos, and I was extolling the virtues of the Knish over the blintz. So I'll meet you next Shavuos for a Knish blintz-off. I think with that, we can win.
And the other one I'll throw out. I'll just say it, and then my shame will be past. The bean Knish.
Wow.
Sweet bean Knish.
Well...
sweet bean Knish, kind of almost like the Chinese moon cakes, that filling, yeah.
Well, this is, you're reminded, so part of, if I'm not mistaken, part of the way you found out the Schwabel story was somehow linked to Matthew Goodman, whose book I believe is sold here. He wrote Jewish Food, the World at Table. There we go, Jewish Food, the World at Table, thank you. Whew. And is as a friend and a mentor to me. And he came here shopping with his kids who had just come from Yiddish class while I was working in the bookshop. So it really is full circle. And it was in conjunction with research for him. I think that this was somehow in your Rolodex, in your mind. And I bring it up because he gave me an extended loan, the cookbook, the Forward Cookbook, which I'll defer to you on, but that has recipes well, you tell us about the cookbook, then I'll tell you about some of the recipes in it.
Thank you for jogging my memory. Thank you. I forgot to mention a little bit of the context of food writing in the foreword is that the one and only food writer was a woman named Regina Frisch Fossor. And she was from Vienna, I think, originally, came to New York, and she was active in some of the Jewish societies, the Workmen's Circle, people might know, the Arbeiterring, that sort of worked in concert with the Forward. Anyways, she eventually was hired to write a food column for the Forward. This is around in the 30s. And she passed away in 59, so she probably did it for close to 20 years. And she was one of the first people to use crowdsourcing as a method to her madness. She would invite readers, to send in recipes, and then it was a contest. It was a recipe contest, and you won $5. And got your... Yes,
that's a lot in the day.
38, sure. Yeah. And you got, the Knish was 40 cents, so $5, that's a lot of Knishes.
Right, the Knish was even less, I think, then.
And she would publish the recipes. And then in 46, she published the one and only cookbook we've ever done so far at the Forward in Yiddish. And I think in the 50s, it was translated into English. And these are collector's items. You can't really, they're out of print, obviously, but they're also really hard to find. You have to go to a Judaica antiquariat or eBay, for $500 to find them. Really? Ooh, okay.
Bonnie Slotnick's on 10th Street. You heard it here. That cookbook, though, which is on extended loan to me, maybe too extended, it has recipes for a range of Knishes, including rice Knishes, I believe a sweet bean Knish, and a beet, B-E-E-T, beet Knish. So anything was possible. This isn't new. Artisanal Knishes, it's not so new. We can refer you to some local Knish places to try.
Should we Q&A?
Yeah, sure. On that note, let's sample some of your questions or responses. Sir? Okay.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Very intriguing. I just have a question then. If the Knish originated from Knishin, did it take off in Poland? Did it actually expand? And did it ever intersect with pierogies at some point?
Okay, excellent question. If the Knish has origins in Knishin, did it take off in Poland? And what, if any, is its relationship to the pierogi? As far as I know, there's no Mick Knish franchise yet. That leads me to another story, but I won't go there. I believe, I've identified this corridor of Knish history in Eastern Europe, and it was in the Pale of Settlement. So Eastern Poland, parts of Ukraine or Belarus and Lithuania, I mapped out the different instances of the Knish. They were all more or less in that column. So I do think that's the birthing ground of the Knish, and it is still, today, the Knish is found in Poland. You saw some, which were made by locals. There are a few different kinds, but one food writer in Warsaw said that the Knish is used for mourning, also on November 1st, which is All Saints' Day, and it's stuffed with meat then and used as an offering to departed relatives. And that day in Poland is very important. It's a long weekend. People drive all over the country, put flowers and remembrances at their families' graves. So it's taken very seriously. Interesting correlation to the Knish as some link to the Jewish past and what we've lost and all that's encapsulated there. And in terms of pierogies, in fact, according to a Polish etymological dictionary, the Knish was known as a pierogi for mourning. That really checks out. And I think of the pierogi as a Knishin cousin too. I mean, all these stuffed foods, stuffed dumplings of every culture have some kind of link and correlation.
What is the origin of the square Knish, and why does the outside pastry so different?
Okay, important question about the origin of the square or Coney Island Knish. Well, okay, so these come from the Gabilla family. Their family name is Gabay, which sounds a lot like Gabai, a caretaker of the synagogue. And Mr. Elias Gabay was born in Niš, Yugoslavia at the time. Can't make this up. His store was on Forsyth. His first store was on Forsyth Street, and they moved to Williamsburg, and where the factory was until they went into self-imposed exile in Copiague, Long Island. Okay, that's the more modern history. I spoke to Elliot Gabay, who's the grandson of the founder, and he said that he was selling these Knishes when he was 13. He was sleeping in the truck and going to Coney Island, and that they mechanized the operation early on because it was good for sales, and those Knishes, they're fried, and the inside and the outside aren't that different when they start out. Once you put them in a fryer, it forms kind of a crust. And during the Knish crisis of 2013 to 2014, Noah Wildman, who lives not too far from here and started a business called Knishery NYC, made his own. He made, actually, since it was that Thanksgiving, Hanukkah time, he made sweet potato square Knishes. And those were a contingency measure. So it is possible to make those. So did the Kosher Culinary School of the Arts in Brooklyn. So those are yours for the making too, if you so choose. You can experiment yourself.
Hi. You started doing this project around the time that the book was being declared dead, or at least books made from dead trees. And in addition to, entering this market at a time that everybody was saying you can't create this product anymore, your particular book involved having to get photographs, visuals, hiring translators. Were you discouraged for those reasons from doing the project?
What will encourage me is your purchase of the book.
gender assignment or personification of Knish. So effectively, is it deemed plausible, I guess, from inception that the round Knish had more feminine qualities, whereas the square Knish was certainly assigned more masculine?
I think, okay, there's a question about assigning gender properties to each different forms of Knish. I should also say there's a half moon variety made by Shat Skins in Brooklyn, and Shat Skins in the house. And also when I led a Knish baking session in Banff, Canada, people made Knishes in the likeness of their own cultural patties, stuffed dough. So I'm not sure how much we can look into that, but I hear, there's a rise of a lot of different academic disciplines, women's studies, food studies, so I hope soon there'll be a PhD in Knishology available where we can really investigate this. Yes, our first subscriber, our first degree, yeah. Oh, sorry, did you have a follow-up?
I do one more. Does your book list a place in New York and elsewhere in the States where you can find Knishes?
Yes, there's a page that says 18 places to get a good Knish. Now, the most important decision maker about what a good Knish is you. So I encourage you to taste them, to make your own, and to weigh in. I'm just perfecting that section of my website where you can submit a story right now about Knishes you've loved or not loved. And I will integrate those into the map I'm making at the first ever international Knish mapping project. Ma'am, and then Trish. Yeah.
I would like to share with you about Shat Skins.
Yes, another Knishery from the Brooklyn Boardwalk.
Yes, it is Brooklyn, Kings Plaza Mall. In the 80s, my friends and I would eat dinner, and then the first thing we did was run to the mall and buy a Knish.
After dinner?
Pizza Knish, and we would have a different Knish every night.
What did you...
What were you going to say?
I said, did you keep a Knish diary?
No, but we tried everyone.
Wow.
Well, we had a lot of fun, but it's not there anymore. It hasn't been there since, 20 years.
20, well, I'd love to hear your recollections. I'd love to do
I'll send it in.
Great, please do. That would be wonderful.
Thank you.
Up here.
Gussie Schwabel offered to send the Knishes on Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, I don't think she was Sabbath observant.
It was an emergency. It was 1942.
And this was a holy act. I mean, it is, as I heard you describe that, you really contextualized it well, and I saw her kind of as a folk hero. I mean, today we idolize or we put on a pedestal all sorts of eating people who work in the food industry, but here was a woman who was really self-made, and I guess that's why all those people flocked to Mrs. Roosevelt's house.
I want to just throw in also, there's a great Yiddish saying having to do with the Knish. It goes, B'makom she'ein ish, tanzen soll a Knish. It probably rhymed in dialect better. I mean, it's basically where there is a leadership vacuum, the Knish will lead.
No way, I didn't know this before. How did I know? Oh my, well, now you see why I have to do a part 2. I think that would look great on tea towels. Other questions, quandaries, complaints? Yeah.
You said you could recommend some places down here in this neighborhood?
Sure, Knish Recommendations here. Well, this is the heart of what once was Knish country and may well be again. Elinor Schimmel's still standing on Houston Street, right just up here. And then there's also, if you've been to Russ & Daughter's new cafe, which is right up Orchard Street, they have some smallish Knishes, and excellent mustard. There used to be a deli here called Noah's Ark. It's of blessed memory. But as I mentioned, Noah Wildman makes Knishes in his apartment, and they are for sale at Malt and Mold, which is on East Broadway. I'm hoping that someone starts a Knish food truck. Occasionally I bake Knishes, that's, special order. But where I do look forward to leading a Knish walking tour, so do contact me and give me your info so I can let you know.
I think you could still get them at Nathan's at Coney Island.
Nathan's, I don't think it has Knishes now, but it's really a shanda or a shame. But There is another place called Zucker Bakery up here and near Tompkins Square Park on 9th Street that has knishes. And now I'm reminded of, they're kind of flaky, they're lovely. And Knish Alley itself is home to there's B&H, they have the knish with gravy. You might want to leave the gravy on the side. And there's that other place across the street, Stage, I think it's called. Stage. They have a knish on a good day. So, and they're the Ukrainian, you can find knish-like foods, if not knishes themselves. Yes.
I recall having hot dog knishes at a wedding smorgasbord.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Oh, yeah, hot dog knish is a hot dog inside a knish. Yeah. How big were they? Really little. Some people call those hush puppies. That's not part of my tradition, but it does seem like a perfect blend. It's like an all-in-one.
Yeah, good marriage.
A good marriage, at least at that moment. Anyone else? Wow, here we have, yes. You are going to be the first Knish PhD student.
In a prior life, I was a Knish. I'm just trying to figure it all out now. Do you have the story or the backstory behind Knish?
Knish Nosh, Queens Boulevard, my home borough. Interestingly, they had franchises, 2 in Central Park. Now there's one at Conservatory Water, where you can poke those little sailboats around, which might be one of the least Jewish places in New York City. I mean, I don't know. That's stereotyping, but in Central Park, yeah. But they own that franchise. You can get a knish there if you're in those upper climes of Manhattan. And it's been around since the 50s. Haig Schneiderman owns it now and hopes to expand to Florida and beyond. They have a nice knish. Big trays, cocktail trays too. Still standing. Okay, yes.
Where did you say it's possible to learn how to make the knish?
Wow, good question. I'm working on setting up a knish making class now that you asked. And yes, so I'm happy to set that up for you and your group of friends. There are cooking, there's a woman up at a community college on the Hudson who leads a knish making class. But why travel up there? I mean, you could if you're going for the weekend. I can put you in touch. But so it's more widespread than you think. But we're working on creating more opportunities for knish self-sufficiency.
Thank you so much, Laura and Chana. That was really wonderful. And